Pues muy buenos días
Good
a todo el
morning,
mundo.
everyone.
Hola a tothom.
Hello, everybody.
nombre
My
es,
name is
Daniel
Daniel Laparra Casado.
Como ha explicado Natalia,
And as
estamos
Natalia
procurando que
explained,
este
we
encuentro
are
sea lo
trying
más
to
accesible
make
posible
this meeting as
y, entre
accessible as
otras
possible.
medidas, para
And
que sea
among
así,
other measures to
lo que
make it
vamos a hacer cada una
accessible,
de las personas que vamos
what we are
a
going to
participar
do,
en
each
este
of
panel,
the
es
participants in
presentarnos
this
también
workshop,
físicamente.
is to present
En mi
ourselves
caso,
physically.
llevo
And in
gafas,
my case,
tengo
I
que ser
wear
de color gris
glasses,
y no tengo pelo.
and I don't have any
Y,
hair. I have a gray jumper.
El elemento también para que sea accesible
And
es, como ha explicado Natalia,
to make it
que vamos a tener
accessible,
una
we are
transcripción
going
con
to
subtítulos
have a
e
transcription with
interpretación en lengua
subtitles
de señas.
and
Todo
interpretation
esto
into
estará
sign
después
language.
disponible en una
This will
grabación
be
en YouTube
available on a
y
recording
podrá
on
ser consultado en el
YouTube
momento
that
que
you
se
can
desee.
access to
Tengo
whenever you
que
want.
comentar que en este
I
panel
have
que
to
ahora
mention
introducimos sobre la
that in the
digitalización de
panel
los
that we are
servicios,
going to
en el que
introduce
vamos a
now
hablar
about
de la
digitalization of
administración
services, and we
electrónica,
are going to
de la
talk about
banca
electronic
y de los servicios
administration,
de salud,
banking, and health
hemos
services.
introducido un pequeño cambio
We
en
have
el orden del programa,
introduced a
de
small
manera que
change in the
iniciaremos la
agenda,
intervención
and
con Carmen
we are
Llorente
going
Barroso
to start
y
with
María Sánchez
Carmen
Valle,
Llorente Valloso
hablando
and María
sobre
Sánchez
mayores en
Valle,
administración
who will
electrónica.
talk about
Después
the older
vendrá
people
a
and
continuación
electronic
la intervención de
administration.
Beatriz
Then we
Fernández
will
Olid
have the
sobre
intervention
reestructuración
of
bancaria
Beatriz Fernández
y finalmente
Olid
Fran Barral
about bank
sobre
restructure,
servicios
and
digitales
finally Fran
y
Barral
salud.
about digital services
Sí
and
que quería insistir
e-healthcare.
en que
And I was
nos
wanting
gustaría
to
mucho que
insist on
esta
the
sesión fuera
fact
lo más
that we
interactiva
want to
posible
have this session as
y por
interactive
tanto
as possible,
podéis plantear
and
vuestras
therefore you
preguntas
can ask your
conforme vamos
questions
avanzando en la
as we move
exposición,
along throughout the
incluso, ¿por qué
presentations.
no? Algunas de las
And why
preguntas
not some of the
podemos
questions,
introducirlas justo en
we
el
can
momento en el que se
introduce them
producen,
as you
si
ask
le damos la
them,
oportunidad, o
if you
esperándonos
give us
hasta el
the
final de la
opportunity, or
intervención.
we can wait until
Y
the end
para
of the
ello podéis
presentation.
usar
And for this, you
la
can
herramienta que
use
tenemos
the
en
tool
YouTube,
that you
el
have on
streaming de YouTube,
YouTube, on the
que
YouTube
permite
streaming,
ir formulando las preguntas por ahí.
to
Las
ask
preguntas
the
que se
questions
formulen por parte
there.
del público que
The
está
questions
conectado
that come
en
from
línea,
the
las
audience that
recopilaré
is
y
online
se las plantearé
connected,
a la persona
I
que
will
haya
pass them
presentado
to the person
la
who
ponencia,
has done the
o bien,
presentation,
como he dicho, cuando
and
acabe,
or
o
when
se
they
procede
finish,
incluso
as I said,
en
or
el
even
momento que esté avanzando la
as
exposición.
they are talking.
Otra forma de intervenir, por
And
supuesto, es
another
para quienes
way
estáis en
of
sala,
participating for
compartiendo
those of you
en
who
la
are
Universidad de
present
Alicante,
in the room
será,
at
como
the
habéis hecho
University of
al acabar la
Alicante.
charla de Máximo, intervenir directamente
You
con
can
preguntas a
ask
través
directly
del
with
micrófono,
any
bueno,
questions
no sé si hay
from
micrófono,
the
o
microphone. I
o
assume
alzando
there's a microphone,
la
although
voz,
I cannot
proyectando
see it,
la voz.
or you can project
Bien,
your
vamos a dar
voice.
comienzo entonces a
Okay, so
este
we are
panel
going to
que
start with this
recorre, yo
panel
creo,
that
tres
I
elementos
think
clave.
that deals with three
Máximo
key
ya ha
elements
expuesto muy bien las implicaciones que
with
tiene
the
la brecha digital
implications of
y
the
esas implicaciones
digital
son todavía más
divide.
evidentes
And these
cuando se
implications are
concreta
even more
en ámbitos
obvious
concretos que
when
definen
we
nuestras necesidades. Aquí
deal
estamos
with
hablando
specific
de
sphere
servicios
regarding our
básicos para la
daily life,
ciudadanía.
with the basic
Para
services for
introducir el tema de
citizens.
la
To
administración
introduce
electrónica,
the topic
contamos
of
con
electronic
Carmen
administration,
Llorente Barroso, que es
Carmen
profesora e
Llorente
investigadora
Barroso, who is a
del
teacher and
Departamento de
researcher
Ciencias de la
at
Comunicación
the
Aplicada
Department of
de la Universidad Complutense de Madrid. Y
Information
sus líneas de
Science at the
investigación se
University
focalizan
of
en el estudio de
Madrid,
las claves
and
visuales
she
y las
has
marcas
studied
y en la comunicación
trademarks
orientada
and
al
visual
envejecimiento activo
keys
y a la inclusión de las
and the
personas con
inclusion
discapacidad.
of elderly
Me
people and
acompaña en
people
la
with
intervención
disabilities.
María
She
Sánchez
will be
Valle, que es profesora
accompanied
del
by María
Departamento de
Sánchez
Comunicación Audiovisual
Valle,
y
professor
Publicidad
of
de la Universidad CEU San
Advertising
Pablo,
and
y su
Communication
trayectoria
by the
científica
University
está
of San
centrada
Pablo, and
en
her
el
research
estudio de la comunicación
work
de
is
entornos
focused on
interactivos,
the
especialmente
communication
dirigida
study in
a públicos
communicative
en situación de vulnerabilidad.
environments for people with
El título de la
vulnerabilities.
intervención es Mayores
And
y
the
Administración
title
Electrónica,
of the
el comportamiento
presentation
diverso
is
de
Older
este
People
colectivo
and Electronic
en el
Administration,
desarrollo de
the
trámites
diverse
online.
behavior of this
Carmen
social
María,
group
por
in
favor,
the
cuando
development of
queráis.
online procedures.
Buenos días.
When you wish. Good morning.
Muchísimas gracias.
Good morning. Thank you very
Daniel
much,
Laparra.
Daniel
Muchas
Laparra.
gracias
Thank you
también a Natalia
also
Papi
to Natalia
por
Papi for
invitarnos y
inviting us
dejar difundir los
and
resultados de nuestra
giving us the
investigación.
opportunity to
Y
disseminate the results
muchas
of our
gracias
research,
a la
and
cátedra que dirige,
thanks
porque
also to
creemos
the
que este
chair
tipo de
that she
iniciativas son
directs, because we think that
muy
this type of
importantes y que
initiatives
la
are very,
propia
very
administración
important
se implique
for the administration to engage. So you really deserve great congratulations. And before starting, I am going to describe myself physically, very briefly, so you can imagine what I look like. I have long hair, which is dark brown, curly hair, and although normally I don't wear glasses, when I am short-sighted, and this is a presentation that requires me to wear them, so I am wearing them. And as Daniela Parra mentioned, our proposal is regarding a better understanding about the behavior of people that are older than 65 years old regarding the electronic administration in Spain. The most important result has been published in the Journal of Electronic Development Research. It was published this year. It is a very recent research, and it is within a framework of a competitive project by the region of Madrid, co-financed by the European Social Fund. And well, these are the results that are within this project. And the acronym is ProBuilding, and it will finish in December this year. The first approach to see the background of our specific research, we wanted to tell you what is electronic administration. Well, electronic administration means the implementation of the ICTs and the digital media to the different services that are offered by public administrations. And this implies not only a technical issue, but also other issues regarding democracy, transparency, and participation by the citizens. In this respect, e-governance wants to facilitate both to citizens and companies a useful, efficient use of public services, and to speed and make these possibilities swifter regarding public services, and at the same time enhance democratic processes and make governmental policies at all levels, whether local, regional, or state and national levels, make them more efficient for everyone, for all the citizens. And here is the aspect we want to focus on, because not always the electronic administration is including every citizen. It is true that the e-administration must be an opportunity for every citizen. We must take into account that not everyone is equally prepared regarding the digital realm. There are different levels of digital divides that affect different groups of audience, and frequently people older than 65-year-old are one of these public groups, audience group, and the services from the public administrations are especially important for the seniors, so there is a contradiction between the importance of the electronic administration for certain citizens, whereas precisely these citizens cannot make a profit or take a benefit from those services that are offered digitally. But in the latest research that are being carried out, this group, social group, has an increasing interest in electronic administration, and they claim that they have a better satisfaction with the services that are offered by the e-administration through digital services, and they have a positive attitude towards the use and the enhancement of the use in the future. However, it is true that nowadays there are still negative reactions among different social social groups regarding the possibilities offered by the e-administration. And we can see that precisely the adults in both extremes, both the older and the younger, are the ones that have a higher rate of rejection to this type of services. In general, in Spain, it was proposed that e-administration was completely digital by 2020, but it is true that nowadays, according to data from the National Institute of Statistics dating back to 2021, the adults from 65 to 74, only half of them have used public administration online, and over 75, they are not even considered. The only assessment they get is whether they can ask for a medical appointment online. And for this, it is about 31% for the people who are over 75 years old. So there may be an interest, but this interest is not even measured, and this is alarming. And of course, we should reflect, the public administration should reflect on this. If we analyze previous research works, same as other digital services, in the case of electronic administration and other services, the older face different barriers that can be economic, technical, social, and frequently they are a result of individual issues, but also structural issues. Monar proposes a design to establish systems of electronic government that follows the line of the recommendations that are linked to the model of technological acceptance, TAM. A higher education can be linked to a higher acceptance of the e-government services, especially among the older or the senior citizens. So there are different variables that work in a similar manner as how they work with the use of technologies, if we compare it to the electronic administration in particular. As we heard in this session, in this event today, there are digital divides, and there are many research works that determine that age has a negative impact on the level of digital capital that any person has, and therefore, normally, obviously, the older people are, the less digital capital they have. It is also true that there are some bodies of research that seem to suggest that as the older population gets over 65-year-old with previous technological experience, then this divide compared to or regarding the use of digital services can become shorter. But of course, technology will move on, so there will be new divides. So in the end, this negative relationship exists, and this negative relationship has been identified regarding age, but also that not everyone that is over 60, 65 years old have the same digital capital. What I mean is there is a generational digital divide, but also there are divides among the same generation, depending on the frequency of use of technologies that you may have had, the digital capital that you may have developed throughout your life from your own experience. Then you can reach this age and you may do certain uses online that people of your same generation or even of a younger generation want to develop. And these divides that have to do with skills and competencies and benefiting from technology, that is the second and the third level of the digital divides, they are as important as the divides regarding access, digital access. And actually, what does this mean? Well, the group of the senior citizens regarding their digital behavior is very heterogeneous. And we cannot talk about a single profile of older adults, but there are different profiles of silver surfers. These internet users can have different behaviors, and we can do different classifications. There has been classifications that assess the digital capital and the uses of technology, the behavior of their online searches, the surfing patterns, how they share personal data and phishing practices, the use of the media for leisure purposes. But it is also true that these classifications sometimes do not mention uses that are very significant nowadays, such as the e-banking or purchasing online, and of course using the electronic administration. There are more and more things that have been put online, and you cannot do them offline. And this is a challenge for these people that have more difficulties to develop tasks online or to perform tasks online. So the main goal of our research is to understand within this background of the seniors that are over 60 years old, the behaviors that they develop regarding e-administration in terms of their use and preferences for their use, the reasons for the use, or the barriers that they have for their use. So we profiled the three specific objectives. The first one was to detect different profiles of users depending on their use and the behavior they develop facing the electronic administration in Spain. And secondly, to try and see the differences between these profiles. And thirdly, to know what type of adaptations they would need, especially those profiles that use less the e-administration, to motivate them so that they can use it. And also trying that the e-administration makes an effort to adapt to this profile that also needs to participate from the e-administration. So now I will give the floor to my colleague, María Sánchez Valle, who will introduce or present the rest of the presentation. Thank you very much. Hello, good morning. Thank you very much. So as not to interrupt the presentation, I will add myself to all the thanks that were given. I will give a picture of myself. I have brown hair, I do not wear any glasses, and I'm wearing a green shirt, a green and blue shirt. Carmen told us that when we tackled our research, we saw that the previous body of research, we saw that the senior audience, we could not place them all in the same category because they are not all equal from different places, for instance, and they are not equal. So we thought it was interesting to do a cluster analysis through which we could define different profiles. And to do this, we did a telephone survey with 405 people between 60 and 79 years old, and we did it in February 2019. And why did we do it on the phone? Well, because although we were using people who surfed the internet, not everyone had the same skills, so we decided to do it on the phone, because otherwise we would have left behind many participants, many older people that would not have done the service, but who did have some contact with the internet, and this is why we chose to do it on the phone. As you can see on the screen, we did 4 ways. Those people who do their shopping or buy things online and other procedures, whose average age, and it was 160 participants, 35.2, 41% men and 49 female, and between 60 and 65 years old. Secondly, those who purchase on the internet but do not do any procedures. Average age is 69.5 years old, and basically in Catalonia and Madrid. And then the third profile, those who do not buy anything but do some electronic procedures with the administration. The average age is 69.1 years old. 22% were in Madrid, and they are mostly males. And the fourth way that we considered as a fourth way were those who do not buy anything and do not do any procedures either, but they do surf the internet. They do use the internet. And their average age was 69.9 years old, and most of them, 28.9%, are in Catalonia. And for these pathways allow us to detect a series of behaviors. It is a first approach where we can see that not all of them have the same relationship with the administration and with e-shopping or e-commerce, which is what was the main focus of our research. So what we did was to identify a series of groups with unsupervised methods, with a cluster analysis that was done by a mathematician for us, and if he was present, he would be able to explain it better than myself. And we did 2 analyses, one for those who used the e-administration and another one for those who did not use the e-administration. And we use R 4.0 software. And we did first a calculation of the similarity matrix, analyzing the similarity between a number of objects, and our mathematician this cluster method and use an algorithm. Well, this is not what I know better, and I do not feel at ease because it was done by a colleague. But in the end, what was detected was that there was 10 possible groups. I don't know if you can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so before commenting these groups of people from these clusters, we think that it is interesting to highlight the confidence level that older people have in the webs of the e-administration and the capacity that they think they have to buy things online, because somehow we think that this determines their relationship with the administration. So as we can see on this table, the confidence level, we have low, middle, low 21.7%, and middle almost 49%, and high confidence level is reduced. And regarding the capacity that they think they have to buy things or do procedures online, 78% think they have a low capacity or middle capacity, and only only 17.8% think that they have high level and 4% very high level. So we can see that the older people are aware that they are facing the e-administration with limitations. If you can move on to the next slide. Okay, so in this table, we can see the profiles and the patterns of the older internet surfers depending on the use of the e-administration. So what did we do? We identified these groups depending on a series of questions. These questions, we had different questions, and we selected the questions that could define better the clusters. And the questions define the style of surfing the internet by the user and the barriers and motivations for their use. So being afraid of making mistakes, the confidence that they have on the procedure, the perception that they are asked for too many data that they have already been asked, giving personal data, higher confidence on websites such as Amazon rather than the e-administration websites. And before the telephone service, we did some discussion groups, and they told us that sometimes they trusted more on websites such as Amazon rather than on e-administration websites. Also, their previous experience in access, because they had had problems before, or because they thought they had to be simplified, lack of self-security when doing procedures, the description of the website with a very technical language, and the prior experience to doing the procedure. There were other questions that we asked and that we have used to build these clusters, and we asked them about the actions that the administration could take to make the use of the internet easier for them. And among these actions, we proposed unify passwords and have a single key to simplify the content of the web sites and to have adapted to their age contents and receiving more training as well. On the table, we can see the answers from each of the groups, but perhaps if we move on to the next slide, here you can see represented of the different groups that use the administration on figure 1, and figure 2 is for the importance, the answers that were more important for the classification of the groups. I don't know if I'm running late, but I am going to explain about the groups, which I think is the most interesting part. On red, we were the ones who were more reluctant. We have given them a name so that you understand about the differences. So those who were reluctant, who is the most numerous group with more people, they are characterized because they are scared of giving their personal data and they have more difficulties to remember their passwords. And for the improvements, they are interested in these improvements that we proposed. The green group in olive green is cluster 2 and were those who were confident. They do not express that they have many barriers for the administration, and they are especially interested in the content and the design of the web should be easier, including a simplified version for the older people. Esmeralda, the name of Esmeralda, I don't know if you can see it at the left bottom. You could see the skeptical in emerald green. They are the skeptical, and they have less confidence in e-administration compared to commercial websites. And they would be more interested in the administration implementing measures to incentivize the use. They do use it, but they think that they would use it even more if there were some measures implemented. In blue, we can see the cautious ones who have less barriers regarding receiving an online certificate, and for them all the proposals are very interesting. And in pink, you can see those who have a reserved attitude, and they think that is very interesting, that the actions that we proposed. All of them, they are users of e-administration to a lesser or greater extent. Some can be limited to getting an appointment with their doctor, and others do their tax return online. So they all think that there should be a change by the administration in order to incentivize use.
On the next slide, we're going to talk about this. In this case, we will be talking about those who do not use e-administration. So, what do we see here? We see another 5 groups. In red, we would have the most numerous cluster, who are those we called cautious, that have all the barriers, and they are very insecure and cautious. They would be interested in having webs thought for various audiences, like the older people, and to have receipts of the procedures done, have more information. And they're also very interested in having simpler webs to help them perform online procedures with a service to solve problems. As regards the critical ones, that would be the green, are those who consider that websites are not easy to use, and that's why they do not use them. They would be interested in including the changes proposed. The optimistic have no barrier when using e-administration, but they show an interest in including solutions to do it. We think that the optimistic do not use it, but if there was a more friendly administration, they could do it. Those who are indifferent in blue are a cluster with all the barriers they were asked about, and they do not consider it interesting to have these adaptations. And there are people who have the right not to want to use an online service and to have a different kind of service. And we believe that this is the indifferent. And then the discouraged ones that tried to do a procedure but did not achieve it. So that's why they stopped using e-administration. Regarding the conclusions, maybe, Carmen, you would like to talk about them? As you wish, Maria. Okay. Well, very quickly, and to conclude, basically what we observed in this research is that older people in Spain are not intensive users of e-administration because it's about more than half of them admitted doing at some point a procedure, like 57%. And mostly they admit that they have a low or average level to face the online procedures or online shopping. Among the users who admit having used or being users of e-administration, the most numerous clusters are reluctant and confident are those who consider that it is not necessary to do so many changes on the e-administration website because their behavior pattern already shows that as they are, they can use them. However, the skeptical ones and the cautious ones state that the e-administration should adapt to the websites to the needs of people who do not have the means to access certain services within the current structure of those websites, like the Community of Madrid, the Local Council of Madrid, or the Spanish government or other ministries. And finally, the reserved ones who have a reserved attitude are concerned about the dissemination of personal data on these websites, and they considered that there should be a simplification process of procedures online and that they should obtain help when they are carrying out that procedure. The older people who do not do online procedures have two different behaviors where we can make a difference. There are two types of non-users among the elderly. On the one hand, the critical and who are those who do not feel safe, so they decide not to use e-administration. And on the other hand, we have the optimistic, and it's a matter of security or no specific barrier. They do not use e-administration due to a lack of interest. As Maria said, some people, they just do not like using technology. It's not that they don't have the skills. They just prefer other ways to contact the administration. What we have observed, and we think it is very interesting, is that there are no big differences between those using e-administration and those not using administration as regards the barriers for the use or non-use. So that could imply that the reasoning is more linked to the benefit they perceive. And the benefit perceived is not interesting enough so that the online procedure is worth it. So simply they just drop it before starting. So it's something some food for thought for administrations. It would be good for people over 60, but also for any citizen. And so far, our presentation, I'm sorry if we used so much time. If you need more information because you find it was interesting, you have our emails at the bottom left of the screen. And we are at Daniel's disposal and for the rest of the audience in case you have any questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much to you. Natalia was applauding. It's the time to applaud, but it's more difficult through these means. Congratulations for your initiative on this research. I think it provides very valuable information for the administration, as we will see in the next presentations for other services, banking. It could give important insight on how the situation is perceived by the population. We have a question through the YouTube chat. Jordi Juan is asking about the sample of the survey that you use for the clustering. It's 405 people, phone surveys done by a company, and the data have a reliability of 95%, and the article we have published, you can see all the details about this sample. I don't know if you want some specific things between 60 and 79. That's the age range from everywhere in Spain. And what we did is that there are not none of the provinces is overrepresented. Logically, in Madrid and Catalonia, there are more cases because there's more population. Thank you very much. If the article has a link that you could share, if you could send it through the email and I can share it on the chat so that people can have access to all the details. Let's see if we have any questions from the room. Natalia, maybe someone? Any questions from the floor here in the room for this first presentation? No, there are no questions, Daniel. Thank you. Among the people in the panel, I think there is one question. Bran Barral would like to ask a question. Okay, thank you, Daniel. First of all, congratulations and do a digital applause for administration in general. And there are several subfields and ways of interaction. I would like to make a methodological comment, and I think it's very important for the interpretation of results that you were also mentioning. The choice of a phone survey to obtain these data, I think it's a methodological mistake, but that's my opinion. We can discuss this. The different formats. Not in your case and our case, because we know the idea of phone survey for these studies. We are using a lot virtual surveys, CAUI surveys through the email, and that leaves out many people. So these samples are not representative for certain domains. And this also together with data you did at the beginning from the National Statistics Institute, there's more use, more confidence, and people over 65 or under 65 are using more e-administration. But if we see other samples, we find contradictory data when we do specific surveys. Why? Because in other studies we find that this is not increasing and a more rejection effect. So I think there's a methodological problem that I wanted to comment upon. And I don't know if you would like to clarify something. And then a question to clarify the concepts of security of online procedures, reliability. I don't see the difference and the capacity. I don't see the difference between the different concepts and these terms. Maybe if you could clarify what is the security of online procedures. I'm confusing this with the trust of the person, the confidence of the person. I don't know if you can maybe clarify this a little bit more, the differences.
Muchas gracias. Carmen y...
Muchas gracias. María.
Thank you very much. Maria, should I answer?
Vale.
Okay.
Vale. Respecto a la encuesta telefónica, lo tuvimos muy
About
claro
the
cuando
phone
lo
service,
pusimos
we
encima de la mesa.
had a very clear idea when we
Más
proposed
casi
this.
lo que te llega a través de tus seres queridos,
This
¿no?
is what you get from your loved ones. If they use the phone to use the internet, they're not going to fill in a form with the phone. So that's why we decided that the survey had to be on the phone. And about the National Statistics Institute is that the reference we all have, the big thermometer, when I saw the data of almost 31% of people over 75 asking for online medical appointments, I was wondering to what extent is it true that so many people of that age are making appointments through the electronic system? And I have my doubts. So for us, it was
es más
clear
barato
it's
también
cheaper
contratar
to
panel comercial
hire a
a
commercial
través
panel
de encuestas online.
through
Pero bueno, dijimos
online
un poquito de menos
surveys, but
muestra,
maybe a
que creemos que al final va a
smaller
ser más
sample, but that
representativo.
will be more
Me alegro
representative.
de que compartamos
So
esta
I
idea
agree on the
entre
fact that we share
nosotros.
that idea.
Luego, respecto al
Then
termómetro
regarding
de la
the
seguridad y
thermometer
la
of
confianza, bueno, es cierto que van
security
totalmente
and trust,
asociados,
they are
pero la
linked,
seguridad es
but
como que se
security
deposita más en la
is
fuente,
that
en
is
el
more
otro,
based on the
mientras que la
source,
confianza
while the
es algo más que
trust,
sale de uno.
something coming
Está vinculado. Al
from
final,
the person.
la seguridad
So
de una
the
fuente te hace tener
security
más
of
confianza
a
o menos en
source
esa
makes
fuente,
you
pero
be more
digamos que la
or less
confianza lo
trustful.
entendíamos como
So we
más
understood the
subjetivo.
trust and
Pero
more
están totalmente
subjective thing,
vinculados
but they are
y muchas
linked,
veces a la hora de interpretar los
intertwined.
resultados lo vinculábamos totalmente.
When
No sé si
studying the
María quiere
results, we
aquí
linked
matizar
these. I
algo.
don't know if Maria would like to clarify something about this.
No se te oye.
I could
Sí,
not
no,
hear you. Oh, okay, now you
yo
can
creo que
hear
es
you.
lo que ha comentado también Carmen,
It's
¿no?
what
La
Carmen
seguridad también
said.
está en la seguridad
Security
de
is
cuando hago un
when
trámite,
I carry out a
sé que lo estoy
procedure,
haciendo bien
I know I'm doing it properly,
y confío
and I
en que va a
trust and
tener
I
el
am
resultado
confident
que
that I
espero.
will obtain the results I'm looking for.
Y sobre eso tendríais
And
alguna,
about
porque decíais,
that,
tengo más
well,
confianza
it's I
en mi
have
perfil de
more
usuario en Amazon, por
confidence, more
ejemplo,
trust
que
on
con respecto a la
Amazon
administración electrónica.
than e-administration.
Y teníais alguna
Do
idea
you
o
have any
hipótesis
idea or
respecto a
hypothesis?
por qué? Es decir, ¿es la
And
visibilidad de la
why?
marca
Is it the
frente
brand
a que no se conocen aún los
visibility
servicios? ¿O no os lo
and
habíais
other
planteado? No sé,
services
para
are
futuras
not known?
investigaciones,
Maybe
digo,
you
sobre
did
todo.
not reflect upon this?
No, no hemos profundizado
No,
tanto
we did not
tanto en
go
esto.
into that
Realmente lo que
depth.
sí vimos fue
But what
es
we
algo más
saw
que sale
is
de los
something
grupos de
that comes
discusión que
from the
hicimos
discussion
previamente
groups we did
y
recently.
que les lo asociaban también
This was
a la confianza a la hora de
associated
ceder
to
sus
the
datos.
trust
Y
when
entonces
giving the
en los
details.
discursos de los grupos de
In the
discusión
discussion
sí
groups,
que manifestaban
what they
que se
stated
sentían
is
más
that they
cómodos, más
felt
seguros, más
more
confiados cuando
comfortable,
estaban en
more
una
trustful when they
página
were
de
on
comercio, en una
an
plataforma, ¿no? En un
e-shopping
marketplace,
website, a
que
marketplace,
cuando estaban haciendo
than
pues
when it
un
was
trámite.
a
Quizás también por lo que te
procedure.
juegas, ¿no? A la hora de hacer
Also because
el
there's more
trámite,
risk
como es la
when
declaración de la
your
renta,
income tax
no es lo
return
mismo
is
que
not the same
comprar
as buying
pues unos vasos
some glasses
en Amazon.
on Amazon.
Muchas gracias por la respuesta.
Thank you
Creo
very
que
much for
Beatriz
your
quería
answer. I
intervenir, pero
see
al
that
mismo
Beatriz
tiempo,
would like
pues
to
es el momento de que
speak,
empiece su
but it's
intervención.
also her turn to
¿Quieres
start
hacer una pregunta al hilo de lo que se
her
acaba de
speech. Do you
comentar?
want to
O
say
ya
something about this?
empezamos con la intervención?
Or should we start with your talk? I just wanted to make a comment.
Absoluto, absoluto, no. Está claro.
Well, okay, just a comment about this topic because you did not specify banking services, but it's also a work we did with a focus group and surveys. We found this question that Bran was mentioning: why there are differences and this confidence or this trust. So I would like to congratulate Carmen and Maria for their work. I think this difference is important with the cluster analysis, because I think that irrespective of the topic, it's interesting to see that consumers or users do not work in the same way. And in this study on banking services, we try to find the differences. We use a psychologist, consulted a psychologist to look at the behavioral aspects and cognitive aspects. And this is linked to some of the things I wanted to discuss in my presentation, because it also depends a lot. The person who's facing any service, a consumer, all these cognitive factors have an influence on the difficulties. Well, in this study, to summarize, there were people with more trust, more confidence in their capacity to make decisions, and less shame. The shame was also a negative factor. They had less difficulty measured in an objective way in terms of conflicts with banking companies. This is a factor of personality that would be interesting. I leave it there in case you want to study that in the future. And without further ado, I can introduce myself. Okay. Well, I'm going to introduce you very quickly. She works at the University of Alcalá, and the research lines include company and sustainable development, the financial sector, and social inequalities. In the last few years, you focus your work in the changes in the banking system and the effects in financial exclusion in developed countries and in the case of Spain. So thank you, Beatriz. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Daniel, and Natalia also for the invitation. I wear glasses. I have long hair, quite long, straight hair, and reddish hair, and I'm wearing a blouse with blue and white pattern. And well, I'm going to start. I'm going to share the screen, see if everything works. I'm going to share the slides. I hope you can see it. Otherwise, Daniel, you will tell me. Yes, we can see it. I'm going to talk about banks, about banking. I'm not going to do such an in-depth analysis as Carmen, Marianne, on a specific aspect because I do not have my own study on this digital divide of banking. I try to do a presentation, a wider presentation, horizontal presentation on the circumstances that could influence the digital financial exclusion. As you said, Daniel, I'm specialized in developed countries. That's my research line. So in Spain, there is no financial exclusion. Everybody is something, people in general have access to appropriate banking systems. And you could think it's only for underdeveloped countries, but it's very different. But it's not just enough saying that there is no financial exclusion in the country because about 97% of the population have a bank account. This is one part of two services that are required by the current life. So having a bank account does not solve the problems in general. We're going to see some of these problems. So digital financial exclusion is a new phenomenon that is appearing due to the digital divide, is partly created by this transfer of banking system to the online domain. It is true that developed countries, or the platforms that offer financial services online, the net effect was the opposite. So the population has been a reduction of costs with these platforms has increased among the population. But we are focusing on Spain as a developed country where the majority of people have access to a bank account, banking systems. So we have to see it from that point of view and to define this as I have or do not have, simply. In the conditions or the terms in which people can access those banking services, and when there are situations of inequality in terms of access or greater difficulties for some people, we are finding financial exclusion, not so much access, but use of those financial services. This is a definition that we use. It is much more complex and much wider than just yes or no, do you have a bank account? But these vulnerability factors, where are they coming from nowadays? So we're going to focus on the digital vulnerability. And here one of the actors, I don't know if you can see my pointer, it's on the presentation, but this third line, the digital transformation is the great factor that is causing that financial exclusion due to the difficulties to use the banking systems online. Well, as I said, this graph where we identify the financial aspects, where we have this. Soy fatal. This was very important with the low interest rates. So for banking, there are certain services, more services like saving or using other types of products, credit, investment, are not especially interesting. And that has an influence, because it has an influence that when the banking has resources for this kind of consumer, it offers these services. In the digital transformation involved is linked to the previous one, and also due to the financial crisis, forced to reduce the cost, and is forced to reduce the branches, and also the technology allowed at that same time to take the population towards online banking. And in this situation of financial crisis, where banks had to reduce their costs, also accelerated this digital transformation. And that is why we are in a situation where the process is not mature and is causing problems, because there are people who could not complete that process properly. And it's not just necessary to have an account nowadays. It is a compulsory transformation, and you need to have those online services. You could be a client and do not want all the costs that it involves to be seen at the office are much higher than what is imposed if you are an online client. Banks are offering these two lines. It's two banks. It's online banking. It's much cheaper in terms of costs, and the in-person bank that has high costs. For many people, especially when we talk about vulnerable population, it's very costly to have this. Maybe they do not have enough income to have this kind of bonuses to have access to their accounts, and it's very high cost. So they are forced to use banks, but also to use online platforms. And there are very different types of situations, like the personal cognitive factors I mentioned before. And we find the personal situation, age is one of those factors, or health problems, disabilities, that could cause more vulnerability, and the financial situation, of course. Therefore, the last part will be financial education, the lack of knowledge and experience. And here we're talking about confidence or trust, like we mentioned in the previous presentation. This is also important. It's one of the factors that need to be tackled to approach the situation. These are the triggers for digital transformation in banks and how it has evolved, how the situation has changed in just 10 years. In 11 years, what we have is a reduction of 30% of branches of banks, especially savings banks, were merged or absorbed by banks or other entities, credit cooperatives, rural savings banks have survived very little. They're very small entities, but have changed the situation of entities. But savings banks and cooperatives were linked to certain territory. They were located in certain towns. They had other reasons apart from market share and business. They had other goals. A large part of those institutions have disappeared, and there's a new model of private company that has to be competitive financially, also in the markets, and that requires a different type of profitability. So within this 30% of the reduction of institutions, so reduction of competition in the market and the creation of large groups, and we are talking about oligopoly. And the employees have been reduced. Well, I start first with the branches, because branches have been reduced, as we saw on the right-hand side of the slide, by 50%, the branches from 2009 to 2020. A large part, Spain was a country where there were many branches. You had your bank in your own street, in old towns, and very often these branches were optimized when they were mergers. They could not have two entities at a short distance, so they had to close one. But the closing, it was not just about optimizing. In the analysis we see there are differences in how these branches were closed, for socio-demographic reasons. And the ATMs have also been reduced by a large amount, 20%. So if they've closed down the branches, like in some rural areas, but they have kept an ATM machine, or maybe in the local city hall or town hall. But the truth is that nationally, we have lost 20% of ATMs. So this is also a symptom that we want to transfer these operations to online banking for financial transactions of different types online.
And the staff have also been reduced, not as much as branches, which has made increase the ratio of employee per branch. but they have been reduced up to a third part in the sector. And well, this is an analysis of what I was mentioning. With the closing down of branches, there was a certain logic behind it, but it is also true that other criteria regarding market have been imposed. Regarding the market, the closing down branches was more intense in the places where there was less profitability. And especially, this analysis was done a few years ago with the first wave of reduction of branches from 2000 to 2013, after the financial crisis in 28. And well, here we saw the districts in the metropolitan areas, and we saw that there were similar results, and we adapted the reduction rates in the different areas, related them with their per capita income. And what we saw, using other tools that are perhaps more interesting, is that we saw this reduction of branches in certain areas with a per capita income that was more reduced. And what we saw in these areas was a result of the saturation already in 2013, that it was decided by the number of inhabitants that had to be catered for by the branch. At this level, we should obtain an average to see the number of branches. And what we saw here is that the result was that in those areas with lower income, the number of inhabitants that had to be seen by the same branch was higher. So the assistance or the service to the people would be lower, obviously. So to compensate this, and for this population especially, that would have more difficulty in being assisted at their office, at their branch, they were diverted to the online platform. And what we did was, as I mentioned earlier, with focus groups, we worked with vulnerable population that were in financial vulnerability backgrounds, and they told us that this was a trend, actually, to incentivize the use of online banking. And in rural areas, we can see that we have the same data. The reduction rates were more intense in those regions, in León, for instance, compared to Catalonia or the Valencia region. And the users' organization also published the results of a telephone survey by inhabitants in towns with less than 5,000 inhabitants. And here, precisely, if we can see the last row of the table, we can see that in Castilla-León was precisely the place with 37, almost 40% of the population living in rural towns where there is no bank branch office. And this coincides with the exclusion rates that we have seen in other regions, that places that do not have any coverage or any structure of branches, if the savings banks have disappeared or have merged, etc. This has to do with the disappearance of the offline bank or the social banking. In other regions, such as Catalonia, they do have more access to a branch. But someone who do not have a branch in their small town, they also have the problem of being older than the population in urban areas. So they have to move on average 10.6 kilometers to go to a branch or offline, in person. And the other side of the coin, what is important? Well, the bank decided to develop their capacities, and here we can see a chart, a very recent chart, by the Treasury of the state, the tax authorities, that are analyzing an analysis between the four largest credit institutions in Spain, and we can see that in the years after the crisis, the incentives for technologies has increased year to rate, and then we can see an acceleration in this digitalization process. And also, of course, after situations such as the COVID pandemic have accelerated this process to move towards the online services, online banking services. And here we can say, then we can see if the people adapt or not. Because, of course, we have seen some comments by Carmen, and we are going to see how the users are affected by age. And we could think that actually, depending on the age groups, in general, from 25 years old onwards, the use of electronic banking reduces as age increases, and we can see it on the chart. People over 75-year-old up to 84 do not make 20%, not even 18% of those who use online banking. And for the elder over 85 is only 5% for the use of electronic banking. So here we can see clearly a factor of the use of online banking linked to age. And there is a generation divide. For those that are younger than 25, they use more online banking, more generalized at least. But when they reach 65 years old, will they keep the same rhythm of online use? So here we can see the need to flexibilize and to adapt. And this can be essential. This can entail more cognitive skills or capacity at a psychological level, even if it is digital assets. And we can see if when they grow older, they will be able to manage. We will have to see this evolution and this presence of the online banking. And also, online banking use has to do with not only age, but also with the education level, as one can expect. These are data from the National Statistics Institute, and we can see here the use is larger for those who have a secondary or higher education, not only with online banking, but also regarding education and financial capacity for using technologies, etc. And in the areas, geographical areas, there are also differences. We can see certain regions with urban population groups that are the ones with greater use compared to other regions such as Extremadura, Castilla-La Mancha, Cantabria, with a population profile that use less e-banking. And here we can also see differences. The income is not determining the same for everyone. And one of the questions that I was wanting to say is what makes people interested in using online banking. Well, as you can see throughout the years, the concern regarding security is an important factor for 20%, more or less, of the population. more than the European average, in fact. And regarding the study by the Users Association that I mentioned earlier, they analyzed the rural population, and especially 40% lack the knowledge or do not have the skills for the online financial services, so this makes people not use them. The level of confidence or trust, as Carmen and Maria mentioned, and actually the older you are, the more you go to the office, to the branch, and you are more concerned about security. So there is this large amount of people that are older, and also due to other characteristics that have internet access and so on. So if we use all these factors, I am going to finish my presentation now because I am being told to speed. I would like to mention here that the income also has an impact. There are different variables, age and income level, influence on whether people, and also, of course, the education level, influence on whether people use online banking. And I am going to finish now. We mentioned age. There is a larger population in rural areas, and the lack of a stable job or a stable income or low income, educational level, etc. And what is being done to fight against this? Well, here I would like to mention some policies that are being implemented. Well, now we have a protocol, a strategic protocol. This is a protocol that was done regarding the regulation and the data by the banking associations, etc., that their institutions are part of this protocol. And we can see here some of the measures facilitating the assistance to people, older people or people with disabilities, with special needs. And implementing these measures is also at the internal level and is financed by the own banking institutions. So this is very recent, so we would have to see later on how it works in the practice. And also the administrative has also some defense for users and consumers. And in 2022, will digitalize all the claims and negative reports. So this is also linked with digital education for those people who have difficulties or who suffer discrimination when using online banking. And here we will have to see there are some projects. Of course, I know that the table for experiences in practice is tomorrow. But here we can see projects for financial education for the older people, older than 65 years old, with simulators of online banking, with specific workshops so that they can practice with this type of tools and also gain financial concepts and knowledge, and to increase their confidence and trust in the use of financial online services. And here you can see my email address in case you want to gain deeper knowledge on this information. And that's all. So I will stop sharing my screen so that you can see me and the discussion is easier. Okay, thank you very much, Beatriz. And we give you a round of applause. You can see it on the screen. We are shaking our hands up in the air. And now we are going to see if there are any questions. On YouTube, we have not received any questions specifically. Perhaps someone in the room regarding any doubts regarding banking, online banking, and the concept of financial exclusion. We do have a microphone. Just a second, please, because we have a microphone.
Estaba un poco escondido. Lo hemos encontrado ahora.
With this, we will hear it better. Hello. I would like to link your presentation to the idea that we have seen today of creating a public banking of a last resource for this type of populations due to depopulation reasons, due to age, so that they can have an access without a commercial approach. This is being demanded by users and consumers, or is it something that is just mentioned by the stakeholders? Is it outside of the discussion? Thank you. Well, regarding public banking, there is some interest, and in fact, I have comments from people who are interested in this topic. And regarding the administration, I attended some debates, some discussions by the Ministry of Consumption, and this is not contemplated as of today by the government to move forward along this line. It is true that we already had public banking in the form of savings banks because they were semi-public institutions, and perhaps this was an example or a problem of bad governance by these institutions. The fact that we do not have them anymore. The model was there. That model is still there. It is true that in the end, public things have to be of assistance to those who need it. And legislation must be developed. We have seen that the same legislation in other countries to force commercial banks to be present in the places that are not profitable in order to compensate the overpresence in other areas. For instance, in the United Kingdom, when a bank wants to open a branch in a population where there is only that branch, they need permission or a license for the central bank. So you can actually require it or demand it to have these services. Perhaps it is being used some agreements with the Post company, which is a public company in Spain, to carry out certain projects, for instance, in the Valencia region, where there are subsidies for those banking institutions that want to place an ATM in a certain town. And they do receive this public support. Would public banking have make sense? Well, I think that we could think about it, but we could also think about the pros and cons of other type of measures that are being implemented. But nowadays, no one is considering the possibility of public banking. Actually, the approach is that there will be further mergers because of size issues and to become bigger macro banking institutions. Thank you very much, Beatriz and Natalia. Is there anyone else with questions? Any other questions? No, we do not have any questions here in the room. And well, now we have Bran Barral, who will continue with the presentation. So another question, and then we will give the floor to Bran Barral for his presentation. Okay, so if you allow me, Daniel, I was wanting to ask Carmen, Oh, sorry, I am in the communication mode and I didn't see the message. Okay, don't worry. It was just that I wanted to say that, well, beyond the involvement of the public sector, that I think for certain services is absolutely necessary, precisely for the vulnerable people, not to be left behind, not to be excluded from digitalization. It's also important in sectors as important as banking to raise awareness among this private sector about the importance that the service have among citizens. And I wanted to remember the initiative I Am Old But Not an Idiot, because I think it was a tipping point that made at least the banks react. To move backwards in this imposition of things have to be done like this. And when someone comes, someone that was very intelligent, like many others of his age, but that do not use online banking, and this person said, I am not an idiot, but that this does not mean that I have to use this online service. So what this means is that we have to think, to what extent, Beatriz, do you think that this may have created a change? Because there was some debate around this, some discussion where even politicians participated. Yes, I am convinced that this has created the appearance of these new figures to defend bank users. And it has also generated some attention to the public administration by certain agents, the Ministry of Economic Affairs, the Ministry of Consumption, because after all, they are all in this together, to flexibilize this protocol that I mentioned earlier, to take further measures to assist the older offline, in person, inside branches, and also to reduce even some costs. I am convinced that, yes, of course, and also this is linked to next year. We will see the decisions that are being discussed today. And citizens' actions, of course, has an influence and an impact. Okay. Bran, your question, and then we will carry on with your presentation. Very specifically, thank you, Beatriz. Regarding the post service, I am sharing the position of someone in the room who mentioned this public company, and you said that, well, perhaps this will not be successful. I do not have your training in your field, but I would like to make some clarification. Is there any specific bank, such as Correos Bank, the Post Office Bank? Is the state behind and the state will mediate? Okay, so the state is behind, so that there is this link. But I am not sure, and this is if every bank has this type of agreement to be able to offer the services through the post company. I know that Santander Bank, I am not sure, but actually there is some bank that do have it for sure. And this can be done with some small rural savings bank, or the two savings banks that are left. If, for example, yes, they could access this agreement. I do not know if this is the case, but of course there are interesting questions on how the service is being offered, because in the end, if there is no, if there is a branch in one town and not another, of course, then 70% of the people in that town will have their bank account in that institution. And this is a situation of financial discrimination. I don't think it's exclusion, it's complex. But you do not have this capacity, you do not have the possibilities of choosing. And the freedom of market disappears with this. So this is important. I don't know if I answered your question. I do not have any data with me now. But this model, this public intervention must offer also certain guarantees regarding competition for the whole banking sector, so that we do not go back to an oligopoly where the big bank is only present, because we are talking about access inequalities and inequalities regarding the use of financial services. And the bank with the post office, you can do certain procedures, but perhaps they cannot give you advice or assessment. So it is not perfect. Very, very interesting, this type of partnerships between public and private sectors and between different institutions. Now we are going to give the floor to the last topic. We have seen about the administration, banking, and now we are going to deal with healthcare services, e-health. And Bran Barral Buceta, who is a doctor in political sciences by the University of Santiago de Compostela, where he is a teacher in the field of sociology and social investigation techniques, and we could gather that from his questions. In the research field, he focused mainly on the impact of new technologies in health policies and their consequences on the population. He has carried out several research on e-health and the digital divide. You have the floor now.
Thank you very much. In my case and my colleagues, I also give a description. I have brown hair, very long beard, and I always wear glasses and yellow square shirt. And I will be as quick as possible. I know we are running a little bit late, but you can see this.
Y ahora sí que la veo.
Sí, perfecto. Bueno, pues como decíamos, no me paro mucho más en esto, simplemente comentar en la parte inicial.
I just wanted to say at the beginning that many of the detailed data I'm going to give are from this project you have on the screen. It's one of the projects of the Ministry of Education on competitiveness. You don't see that, right? No, we still see the first slide. It's the poster. It's there at the bottom of the program. Many of the data we will discuss come from this project. It's a teamwork. It's other people, not just me, the Isopolis team, working in parallel with another team. So we have several projects on this. This is the second one. And now you can see, the next slide. So the first thing in all talks, what I do normally in person, how many people know what e-health? Normally not many people know. So what is it, e-health? As a basic definition, usable for all people, is a provision of services related to healthcare when we introduce new technologies everything we can do with a mobile phone or from a screen for a relationship with healthcare system. However, although this definition could lead to think I'm going to ask for a service, an appointment, I'm going to look at my medical history. If we are used with this, we forget that there are many types of users, many different profiles of people using these services. We have the classical, non-so-classical users. What I mean is that not just the people who are chronic or punctual patients, but we also have carers, people who have to take care of other people, and they need to be well informed to request a service for another person, just to receive advice, counseling, to provide that service to the person they're taking care of. So they are not taking care of themselves, they cannot represent themselves. So this is relevant in terms of services and their procedures. And finally, people in good health who do not necessarily need to go to the doctor, they just want to know a specific thing, like I'm going to travel, I need to see what vaccines I need, or if there's some kind of epidemic, that kind of information that now we're so used to following. Now we stopped following that, but we were really hooked up on that. And we also forget that e-health is also an element, like all public services. We have external users and internal users. So we should not forget that when we design a service, in operational services, we develop the interface when we interact with an app, with a website to apply for a service. Behind that, there are people who need to know how to interact with that service. So it's a double-way system. Is front office and the back office, what we see from the administration and what there is behind. There are people behind that. The administration are people. Sometimes we forget that not all people who are in the administration are the same, and they do not have the same capacities and knowledge. So this is an aspect that sometimes we forget. We have the medical staff, nurses, the reception, administrative staff, management. So all that, plus the management who take the decision, and they need to know about these aspects. And it's not always the case. Not all, they don't know everything, and some knowledge gets stuck in some level of the hierarchy, and they do not reach the necessary levels. So we find this problem here, so the general services. And finally, but not less important, we have suppliers, clients, and general population. We are interested in e-health, but also the different actors or stakeholders in the health system. So in the current apps, but this is our opinion. The private companies requested this, demanded this. Insurance companies need more information, also more capacity in data, public and private research. So all those different stakeholders have had an influence on its evolution, like in banking. So in the end, the fact is that we need to observe in research what's happening in the private sector and where it is going, because that will set up the steps we need to follow. And this is important to understand decision-making. Our colleagues were mentioning, Carmen and Maria, on the first talk, that we did not know very well what is the role and who has to take decisions, whether the administration is involved, if things are possible or not. And also Massimo mentioned that this morning. In our case, we tried to study this in more depth to ask those questions to people who are involved or was involved. In some cases, they're not working there anymore in decision-making at this level to understand better the decisions or non-decisions that we are missing that catches our attention. Therefore, to give you a context, some background, that's why I'm trying to go fast. I'm going to, although it could seem that in the healthcare system, in new technologies, etc., is good. We think that everybody thinks we've lost quality, but the public perception and the analysis of service in the assessment, it improved during COVID due to a higher empathy towards a sector that was overwhelmed and tried to keep a service as best as possible. But then we're back to the normal situation. In terms of what we have in the rest of the world, Spain usually has a good position. We have to take this between brackets, but sometimes there are many things left out. Depending on the technique you use for the survey, you could obtain different results. So we have to be cautious with these results and decision-making. But we have a good position. Here in this slide, you see two images of different indexes and how Spain is ranked. So for e-health and e-administration or e-government in general, as you can see in most of them, this is a European index. In general, Spain is above 36, and European, that's for the world, and in Europe, about 17th country in the world. It's not a bad position, so we have to value that. So it means we're good? No, not in the least. So we are still in a preliminary phase, as we observed with the deficiencies in various sectors, and we see how we are forgetting some large parts of the population. And regarding this specific case of Spain, we have widely extended services like electronic prescription and online appointment. That is mostly the service. That is, we do online with e-health, with remote medicine. However, we have primary care services, that's the first line, as the essential level. Is the gatekeeper that blocks access to specialized services, healthcare. We need this primary care service to obtain the specialized care. It's not a bad thing, but we thought this was going to change, and it is still used. So the consequence is that we have a series of elements that are blocking. So they're starting to use digital images with dermatology. E-dermatology is starting to work in some regions, and also remote medicine. But these elements are still quite new and not widely extended. Most of them are in a pilot phase somehow, and in most cases, they are not extended to all the services. They're only used in certain sectors or specialized services. And the e-clinical history is implemented, but is not used. It's widely unknown. Many of us probably just discovered that and how to download the COVID certificate to go to bars, restaurants, and travel, because very often the access was linked to the clinical history, and there it could be downloaded. It also depended on the community or the region.
tenemos elementos que han bloqueado un poco su uso, ¿no? Las barreras de acceso y la seguridad, el
So
tener que usar un
we have
certificado digital,
blocked
cosa que antes
the
también
need to
comentábamos, ¿no?
the
Tenemos
need of a
dificultades para
digital
interactuar con la
certificate that makes
administración
it
en
more
general,
difficult to
porque esto es algo
interact with
que
the
sucede no
administration,
solo en
because
salud,
this is not
sucede
just for
en otra serie
healthcare, but
de
also
campos
in
también
other
vinculados con la
fields
administración
related to
digital, que nos
e-administration
obligan a no
that
solo tener un certificado en
forces us to
algunos
have
casos, a
a
vincular
digital
un teléfono
certificate
móvil
to
que hay
link
que
it to a
vincular
mobile
previamente, en muchas
phone
ocasiones
that you have to link.
presencialmente, es decir,
You
no
have to
tenemos trámites
attend in
perfectamente
presence, so
digitalizados,
not
sino que
everything is fully
combinamos
digitalized.
una,
So we
vamos a decir,
combine
asistencia presencial o una realización
in
inicial de
presence,
trámites
in
presencial con
person
una
first, and then a digital.
finalización de esos trámites digital, que para muchas personas
So that
son
for many
grandes
people,
incentivos.
this
Y aquí también marcar un
is a
punto. Y
problem,
esto es más intergeneracional de lo que puede parecer.
and this is more
Mucha gente joven
intergenerational.
no
Many young
tiene
people
certificado
do
digital,
not
ni
have
cuenta
a
con ello, ni le
digital
interesa,
certificate and are
porque no
not
ven la
interested
utilidad de
because they
tenerlo.
don't see
De
the
hecho,
need to
como
have
ejemplo
it.
un poco al margen, pero yo creo
Like,
que
for
es
example,
bastante ilustrador,
is a good
este
example.
bono cultural joven que se acaba de sacar es
The
otro gancho más para
cultural
conseguir que la gente joven se
bonus,
haga el certificado digital de una vez.
it's
Y
also
te obligan
to
precisamente a que
motivate them
hagas
to
ese
get a
certificado para
digital
acceder a
certificate. They
solicitar
will have
ese
to
servicio,
use it
esa
to
ayuda
use
o bono,
this
en este caso. ¿Por qué? Porque se
benefit,
detecta que realmente, y a nosotros nos
because
pasó también cuando
we
hicimos este
see
estudio, que la
so that
gente
in a
joven y la
study
gente
that
mayor
young
son las
people
que
and old
menos hacen
people
uso de estos servicios.
use these services the
Es una
least.
cuestión de edad,
It's a
porque
matter of
lógicamente cuanto
age.
mayor edad en el ámbito sanitario
In
es más que
certain
evidente que vamos a
age,
ser más
um,
más
we
frecuentadores de
need
estos
to
servicios, ¿no?
use
Es
these
el
services
término
more often,
multifrecuentador que comentaremos más adelante, pero también la gente joven que
but also
bien
young
por no
people
necesitarlo
because
o
they
bien
do
por
not need
simplemente
it,
no
or
hacerse
simply
cargo
because
y de
they
llevar
don't want to take
ese
charge of
cuidado de
that,
la salud en sus padres,
and
madres y
they
demás que se encargan de hacer un poco sus
delegate
gestiones,
that on their
pues
parents.
básicamente
So
no tienen
basically,
interés,
they are
¿no?
not
Y
really
pasa un poco
interested
desapercibido, pero
and
es
they
una
go
cuestión que es bastante,
unnoticed.
como digo, más intergeneracional de
But
lo que
it's more
pudiera parecer a
intergenerational
priori.
that we could think
Y es un
at
problema
first
que tiene la
sight.
administración
And this is a
pública
problem with
porque además ya
e-administration
estamos empezando a
because
relacionarnos de forma digital
we are
y la
starting to do
administración
things
pública está empezando a dar por supuesto, de
electronically,
forma bastante
and
errónea
they
desde
take
nuestro
for
punto de vista,
granted
que
in a wrong
todos y
way
todas
that
tenemos acceso
everybody
ya
has
a esas
access
notificaciones
to
digitales que nos llegan y
these
que a veces no
digital
las esperamos.
notifications, and
Y bueno,
sometimes we
empiezan a ser válidas y poco
don't
a poco empiezan
receive
a
them.
constar como un acto administrativo que es efectivo a todos los niveles, lo cual es otro
So
problema bastante grave a
this
efectos
can
de
cause certain
exclusión.
problems in terms of exclusion.
¿Y cómo se relaciona todo esto
And
un
how
poco
is all this
con el
related
envejecimiento
with
activo o
active
con la vejez, ¿no?
aging, old
Bueno, pues
age?
tenemos
Well, we
esa
have
serie de
a
elementos, la
series
calidad de
of
vida, el
elements:
gasto público, los
quality of
mayores,
life,
la
public
salud, y todo esto
expenditure,
confluye en el
old
concepto de
people,
envejecimiento
e-health,
activo.
and all
Cuando
this
digo confluye,
converges
quiero
in
decir que al
active
final
aging.
está
What I mean is
relacionado y
that it's all
afecta a
related
todos
and
estos
affects
campos.
all
El
these fields.
envejecer
Active
activamente
aging,
o esta idea
or this
de llegar con
idea
la mayor
of
calidad de vida
having a
posible al
good
final de
quality
nuestros
of
años, de
life
nuestra
at the
vida,
end of our life,
incluye una serie de
includes a
ideas
series
y
of
una serie de formas de
ideas
entender esa
and
vejez
ways of
que
understanding
además
old
nos va a
age
repercutir como
that
sociedad.
will
Porque
affect us
lo que
as a
tendemos a
society,
olvidar
because we
cuando
tend to
dejamos de lado a
forget
las personas mayores,
when
lo digo así
with
porque
old
creo que ha
people.
sido lo que ha
I
pasado
think it's
en buena parte de la
somehow they're
de
forgotten. I
los
think
últimos
this
años, de
has
las
happened in the
últimas 2
last few
décadas
years, in the last
especialmente,
2
y es
decades,
que
is
cuanto
that
peor lleguen las personas
the
mayores a
worse
su
quality
última
of
etapa
life they
vital,
have in the last
mayor
part of their
gasto
life,
público van a
more
tener y además
expenditure
van a tener
there
peor
will
calidad de
be,
vida, lo cual es un círculo
and
vicioso
worse
terrible
quality of
para
life.
todas
So
las
it's a
partes
vicious
y que no se
circle.
está entendiendo bien o no se está trasladando bien a la sociedad
It's not
cuando simplemente
understood
los
in
mensajes que nos
society
llegan son
because the messages we
no pasa
receive is
nada,
it
esto es una cuestión
doesn't
temporal,
matter, it's a
llevándolo
temporary
casi al
thing.
extremo, ¿no? En algunos casos. Esto es una barbaridad lo que acabo de decir,
But what I
una
said is
completa
just
barbaridad.
terrible.
Pero es un poco lo que nos está
But
llevando
it's
la
really what
inactuación,
this
pues
lack
es
of
básicamente
action
inacción, es dejadez lo que se está haciendo en muchos
is
casos
really
con
causing
respecto a
this,
este colectivo tan
just
tremendamente importante.
not doing
Y como digo,
anything
todo esto confluye en lo que es la e-salud, porque al
in
final
this. All
la
goes
e-salud
to
lo
e-health,
que más
leads
va a
us to
aportar, donde
e-health.
más va a poder
What
aportar es en la monitorización de
the
estas personas,
contribution
que es
could
lo que
be
más
the
puede incrementar
monitoring
su
of these
seguridad,
people,
su
they
calidad
increase
de
the
vida
security,
y
quality
probablemente,
of life,
como digo, reducir
and
incluso el
to
gasto
reduce
público,
public
que es una
expenditure.
cosa que muchas veces
And
dejamos de
very
lado y no
often
acabamos
we
de ver en el
forget
conjunto de la
and we
ecuación,
do not
pero es un
see in the
elemento
whole
que
of the
tampoco se puede
equation,
dejar
but
de
it's something
observar.
that should not
Y
be
además debería
forgotten
ser un
and
aliciente para
studied,
el conjunto
should
del
be
Estado a
studied.
movilizarse si ya no lo es el respetar a las personas,
And
por
of
ejemplo.
course, the basic concept of
Y paso a
respecting
dar
people.
algunos datos.
And I'm going to give you some
Esto en relación a
data
lo que decíamos
It is regarding the use of all people over 65 of e-services. In our sample, it was 2,600 cases in Spain, stratified in gender, age, habitat
y nivel educativo,
and educational level.
habíamos conseguido
We
un total de
had
396 personas
396
de
people
65
over
años en
65 in total to answer,
de las cuales
out
solo
of which
66,
only
es decir,
66,
16,7% habían
16.6%
accedido
have
a Internet
had
en el último
accessed
año. Datos
internet
del
in the last
2017,
year. This is
¿de
from
acuerdo?
2018.
Claro, esto lo contrastáis con los
If
datos
you
del INE
compare that
o
with
con los
the
datos de la ONCE,
INE,
que es otra de las
National
organizaciones que
Statistics
podéis
Institute, or
buscar, que hace
other
este tipo de investigaciones,
institutions, ONCE,
y está bastante lejos de lo
is
que es
really
la
far
información
from
que
the
nos está llegando
information
por
that
otras fuentes
we
públicas.
receive through other
Nosotros nos
public
sorprendimos muchísimo
sources.
con
We
este
were
dato.
really
Nos quedamos
surprised
aquí,
with
para
this.
serlos totalmente sinceros.
To
Pero esto
to
es lo
tell
que
you the
teníamos
truth, we were
nosotros, que
surprised,
la
and this is
mayoría
what we had. That most
de población no había,
people
de
had
población mayor de
over
65 años, quiero
65,
decir, no
I
había,
meant,
una inmensa mayoría no había
most of them
navegado
had
por
not
Internet en el
been
último año.
online in the
Es cierto que
last year.
decíamos navegar, no como
And
usar WhatsApp, por
no,
ejemplo, ¿de
it
acuerdo?
doesn't mean
Lo
using
definíamos
WhatsApp,
como una navegación
surfing the
utilitaria, es
web,
decir, poder entrar en
to
Google y
go
buscar
into
algo,
Google,
para,
search for
digamos,
something,
aterrizar un poco el concepto.
to
Esto es
specify a
algo
bit more.
que no hacen todas las encuestas,
This is
que
something
incluyen
that
también el
not
uso de
all
herramientas como
surveys
WhatsApp.
do. They
En nuestro
include
caso
things like
entendíamos que esto
WhatsApp,
no
but
es
in
una
our case, we
navegación
thought
como
that that
tal,
was not
no se debería
surfing the
considerar de
web,
la misma
should not
manera.
be considered in the
Como
same
digo,
way, because as I
es
said,
bastante diferente
it's
el
very
saber
difficult to
manejar el
use,
online, el
different
saber
to
buscar algo, aunque sea
use
muy
WhatsApp or
básico, que
to
enviar un
search
mensaje.
for
Es
something
algo,
or
sí,
just sending
a
a
efectos de
message. It's a
computar
different
y
thing.
leer y
So
tal,
when counting computer
obviamente no es lo
skills,
mismo quien no
it's
sabe
not
usar
the
WhatsApp
same
que quien sabe usarlo.
using or not
Es lo
using
mismo usar
WhatsApp,
WhatsApp y usar
but it's the same using
Google con
WhatsApp or using
soltura, con
Google
facilidad, o al menos
easily,
saber cómo se
or
abre y
being
cómo se
able
utiliza.
to
Entendíamos que tampoco.
use
Por
it.
eso
We
creemos
thought
que es
it's
una
not the
distinción
same. So
relevante,
that's
sobre
why
todo a
we
la hora de
made
analizar
the
el
difference when
acceso a servicios.
analyzing the
Una
access to
persona que usa
services. A
WhatsApp no
person
se
who
puede
uses
sujetar
WhatsApp
a este efecto
cannot
de la
be
misma manera.
counted in
O
the
ese es un
same
poco el
way.
criterio que seguimos.
And that is the criteria
Y
we
luego,
follow
otro
here.
dato interesante,
Something
y es que ya
interesting
en
as well is that in
2018 estábamos
2018,
muy cerca de
we were
una
very close
cantidad de
to
población que se
an
conectaba
amount of
cada vez
population that
más a
connected
través
more
del
and
teléfono
more
móvil,
through the
acercándose
mobile
mucho al ordenador de
phone
sobremesa, que es quizás
instead
un
of
elemento
the
importante
personal
cuando hablamos de
computer.
dispositivos, que es
When
un
we
poco
talk
lo que
about the
comentaba esta mañana
devices,
Máximo
as
también,
Massimo
de
mentioned
las
this morning,
diferentes brechas
the
digitales, los
different
diferentes
digital
niveles.
divides at different
Nosotros en nuestro
levels.
caso, como
In
digo,
our
nos
case,
encontrábamos un poco ante esta
we
situación
saw this
en que el
situation
móvil
where the
empezaba a ser un
mobile
terminal
phone was
mediante el
a
cual se accedía
workstation to
más, se
access
estaba empezando a acceder más a
more
lo que eran los servicios,
to
bueno, lo que es Internet en general, y
internet
posteriormente
in
los servicios
general
públicos.
or public
Fijaos
services.
que ya, si sumamos de forma habitual y al menos una vez, superaba a los
So if it's only once,
y
it's
esto no es una cuestión baladí,
more
sobre
often
todo
than
teniendo en
the
cuenta
PC.
que tenemos que adaptar los
So
servicios a
it means
estos
that we need to
formatos. Esa es la
adapt
lógica que
services
debería
to
tener la
these
administración
formats, to
pública,
those
si lo que
terminals,
quiere es llegar a la
if you
población
want to reach
objeto
the
estudio,
target
en nuestro caso, y objeto de la
population
prestación del servicio.
to
Y
provide
esto
these
lo mismo para el sector
services,
privado,
and the same
que
for
al
the
final es
private
exactamente
sector.
la misma lógica que antes
The
comentaba
same
también
logic that
Natalia,
Natalia
cuando
was
hablaba un
mentioning
poco
when
de que el
talking
sector privado
about
debe también
the
estar
private sector, that
en
they
esta
need
ecuación
to
y que
be
debemos
included in the
observar esta lógica
equation,
desde los
and
dos
that we
sectores.
have to
Y
look
para
at this
ambos
logic from
es
both
importante
sectors.
entender
They need
hacia
to
dónde
understand
están yendo,
where
perdón, esta serie
these
servicios y
services are going.
luego, los más jóvenes,
The
entre,
younger,
os comentaba, y los mayores de
between
65 años son los grupos que declaran
over
conectarse
65 and
menos
18 to
a los
24,
portales de salud.
they connect
De
less
esos
to the
66,
e-health
que es el N
portals.
que nos quedó, básicamente, al
These
filtrar,
63 that were left in the survey, 67.69% did not connect to health portals.
Con lo cual os imagináis cómo quedaba la muestra, para luego preguntar a este sector de la población. Entonces tenemos
So
una
we
carencia
have
grave
a lack,
primero,
deficiency,
casi uso, luego conocimiento,
and
y
also
luego la
knowledge,
capacidad
and then
de
the
usarlo
capacity
una vez
to
sabemos
use
que
it
existe
once we know
y
they
entendemos
exist
la
and we
utilidad de ello.
understand
Por lo tanto,
how useful they can
partimos de
be.
muchísimas barreras.
So we have
En
many
este caso, ¿cuáles
barriers.
son las causas? Que es un poco lo que nos
So what are the
interesaba en este
causes?
estudio.
That's the interesting thing.
Básicamente,
Basically,
este desinterés que
is
aparece por
a
aquí
lack
abajo,
of
en la
interest. You
franja
see
de
here at the
más de
bottom, in
65
the over
años, es un
65,
desinterés que incurre también el
lack of interest is
desconocimiento,
covering
pero es un
also
interés
the
que
lack of
al final puede
knowledge.
incluir también la
That
incapacidad.
also includes
De
the
hecho,
inability.
solamente el 7,5%
Only
dicen que es
7.5%
difícil
they
usar.
say
Pero
it's
quizás esa sea la
difficult, but
respuesta
probably
sincera,
that's the
y el
sincere
por
or
qué no me
honest
interesa
answer.
la respuesta oculta que
But then
básicamente
the hidden
referenda lo anterior.
answer is
Entonces,
also
tenemos un
found
problema cuando
somewhere
estas
else.
dos ideas,
So with
donde
these
más
two
porcentaje
ideas,
acumulado tienen, rondan casi el 40%,
almost
es la
40% the
población
population
mayor de
over
65 años. Esa es
65.
una pista que yo
That
creo
gives
que
us
se
a
puede
clue
poner en valor.
that should be
Y
assessed.
luego,
And with all the studies, we saw other operational difficulties. The vocabulary they use is not easy. They do not understand it. The format of the text or the font is not appropriate. It cannot be seen, like in this slide that I have here, that you cannot see. That doesn't count. And then that we have the need to have a series of capacities or skills that well above what would be needed to make an appointment or look at your medical history, or when you have to take your medication, etc. That exists. Probably many of you do not know because it's not advertised, it's not made public. The services exist, but they're hidden. They are not conveyed or shown. Nobody uses them. There are no tutorials that could be very helpful, that could help empower carers to improve the care they provide to the patients if they cannot take care of themselves. There's nothing done on this regard. And the data given are confusing because they don't know the data. We need the data on the card for these people. Sometimes it's not clear whether you can use the regional certificate or the national certificate or electronic ID, or sometimes it's there but then it doesn't work. Then you need another one. These kind of barriers and hindrances cause operational problems. And we talk about the e-patient would be the person who takes care of themselves, and they want us to be like that, but they transfer to us the responsibility with a series of tools that are available to us, but we do not have the necessary knowledge to manage this, so that causes problems. Then we are adapting little by little communication and interfaces to new formats, to the smartphones. The mHealth is a critical element that is valued more and more. Probably none of you knew a health app before COVID. That's very likely not a coincidence. It's because they did not exist before in many cases. Some regions had some apps not fully operational and not for all the services they said they offered. So they were just a link to the website, and these webs were not optimized for mobile phones. So many of the options and other buttons did not appear, so you had to use full screen and things like that. So if we ask what kind of terminal do you use, they say the computer, otherwise I cannot see it. That's what they will answer, if the different workstations they need to use. And as I said, we have a lack of capacity among users and the professionals. So we have to think about the internal and external users. We should not forget sometimes it's not understood on the other side. At the other end, I'm sure there are doctors who still use paper prescriptions and they call the pharmacy so that they are in charge, because we do not adapt the whole system. So we are still living with this dichotomy, the digital and in-person, that should not be such. It should be intertwined and compatible. And finally, we also lose the reference of the fact that there are a series of possibilities that we are not taking advantage of. We do not know of all the services available. We don't use it because we don't know of their existence. And finally, to conclude, I would like to say that when we talk about active aging, we are talking about a concept that depends on the WHO. And so I'm repeating what WHO says. And this is very relevant because this shows us how we will proceed in the next few years and the vision of public administration of what is being done or what they will propose in this planning. One of the latest research we are developing in our case starts from these elements to see what is being said about health and older people and what they refer to, what the topics addressed.
En concreto, la visión que
Specifically,
hay
the
a partir de la
vision
OMS es de
from
la
the
Health World
WHO
Policy,
is
es
the
que la salud no tiene que estar
health
concentrada
in
en
all
un plan de salud,
policies.
por
It should
ejemplo, que
not
es lo
be
que suele
concentrated in
hacer
one health
la
program,
manera clásica de operar en
in the
política, ¿no? En
classical
materia de
way to
planificación
operate in
administrativa,
politics,
sino que deben
but
estar
they should
disgregadas en toda
they
la
should
serie de
be
políticas, la
present in
política
all
económica,
policies:
la
financial
política ambiental,
policy,
la política
environmental policy,
educativa, la
educational
política, desde
policy,
luego, de promoción exterior o turística, debe estar,
tourist
digamos, a lo
policy.
largo de todo
It
lo que
should
es
be
el conjunto de
present
políticas
throughout all the
públicas.
public
Y a partir de
policies.
ahí,
And from
lo
there,
que hicimos fue analizar
what we
qué se
did was
decía
to
en el plan de
analyze what
salud,
was
en
said
los
in the
planes de salud.
health plans.
Al principio queríamos hacerlo
At the
con todos
beginning, we
los
wanted
planes,
to do it
pero
with
era
all
bastante
health plans,
material,
but
vamos a
there
tener
was a lot
21
of
planes,
material, more than
dos más de todas las
100 health
comunidades
plans in
autónomas,
all the
a
regions
todos,
in
esto
Spain.
fue el marco de referencia
So
inicial,
this is the
pero al principio, como
general
digo,
framework.
introducimos todos
So we
los planes un
introduced
poco
all
en el
the
cribado, ¿no? En la
plans.
codificación. Los criterios clave de búsqueda
The
nos arrojaban
key
un porcentaje
search
muy
criteria
bajo
showed a very low
de
percentage
menciones
of
al concepto de
mentions
envejecimiento activo.
to
De
the
hecho, como vengo
concept
por
of
aquí,
active
si
aging.
tenemos en colación todos
Is
los
we
planes
have
que teníamos
in the
disponibles,
population all
que eran en torno a
the
los 100,
plans
más o
available,
menos,
around 100
en el 80%
health
de
plans.
las menciones a envejecimiento activo, con esa
Most of
terminología o
them
en inglés, o
mentions
alguna de las
to
variantes
active
posibles,
aging,
se concentraban
80%
en el último
concentrated
plan
on
que
the
había.
last
Es
plan
decir, primer
available.
punto, es un tema nuevo, esto
So
no
it's
se
a
estaba
new
haciendo.
thing.
Cuando decimos el último plan, hablamos de planes de
We
4
mean
o
the
5 años.
4 or
Es decir,
5 years old,
que los
these
planes de
plans.
2015,
In the
para
plans in
ver una fecha de referencia,
2015, to give you a
apenas
reference,
empezaban a tener en cuenta
they
esta
hardly
idea.
started taking
Lo
this
cual nos
into
dice una
account.
cosa, como digo, que es que vamos muy
So
tarde.
that shows
Eso para
us
empezar.
that we are
Por lo tanto, lo
behind.
que optamos por hacer
So
fue
we
decir, bueno, vamos a
tried
analizar
to
directamente los últimos planes y
analyze
lo
the
vamos a
last
hacer en
few
más
plans,
detalle.
and we're
Y
going
si
to
es
do
donde
it in
más se
more
habla,
detail because
vamos a
this
ver
is
qué
where
es lo
they
más
talk
actual y
about
no
it.
vamos a
See,
empezar con
let's
la
look at the
evolución.
latest
Y de
things,
hecho,
not
incluso
so much
buscando
the
la palabra
evolution.
envejecimiento o
Even
vejez
looking
en
for
general,
aging
el 40%
or
de
active
las
aging,
menciones
40%
estaban
of
en los últimos
mentions
planes,
were
que
in the
como digo
last
son un
plans
15%
that are
del total.
15% of the
Tenemos
total.
16 planes que
So
analizamos,
16
tenemos una
plans.
versión final
We
de
have
creación
one
del plan
final
en la
version
Comunidad de Madrid, que
in
no
the
tenía
community
plan
of
y creo
Madrid
que
that
sigue sin tenerlo estas
has no
agencias de
plan and
salud.
still has no plan
Pero para
today.
que os hagáis una idea,
But
el
to give you an
40%
idea,
de las menciones
40%
de
of
100
mentions in
se
these
acumulaban
plans
en 15, en
were
16,
only in
es decir,
15%
esa
of
era
the
la
plans.
proporción y la
That was the
relevancia del tema en
proportion
cuanto
and
a
the
novedad,
relevance
¿no?
of
Que
this
sería un poco la evolución.
topic. That was the
Y
conclusion.
esos eran un poco los temas.
And those were
Vamos despacito.
the topics. Okay, I am running late, right? Yes, it's past right now.
Aprieto un poquito.
Okay, so I will
Estos
finish
eran un
now.
poco los temas que
So
salían.
these
La
were
autonomía,
the
la salud
topics that
física,
we
la
saw:
discapacidad, la diversidad funcional,
self-sufficiency,
cuidados, la igualdad, el plural,
equity,
la
self-caring,
vinculación con la salud también
equity,
sale
and
como algo
peripheral
cuestionable,
regions
aunque
or
por cierto
central
esta idea
regions.
no
Although this
aparece
idea
en
does
ninguno de
not
los
appear
determinantes de salud
in
de la OMS,
any
que es
of
para
the
mí una carencia clara y una
guides by the
falta de visión del
WHO, and for
funcionamiento
me
actual,
this is a
sobre todo
clear
sobre las
lack of a
potencialidades
vision
que
on the
cabría esperar de él, que no se
contemporary
están
world,
teniendo en cuenta en esos
because
términos.
these things are
Yo,
not
mi
being
apuesta
taken into
personal
account,
es que
but
debería ser un
I
séptimo
think that
determinante y
this
espero
would
que
be a
próximamente se
seventh
incorpore.
determining
Y
factor,
luego también
and I
iría
hope
la
it is
exclusión,
included.
la
And
vulnerabilidad,
also
las
as
residencias
exclusion
de día,
region,
la día a día,
vulnerability,
género,
and
soledad,
day
accesibilidad,
care
el
homes,
buen morir,
gender,
maltrato, cronicidad, cuidadores o salud
abuse,
mental, como algunos se
caregivers,
les llama.
mental health.
Ahora bien,
Those are
el
the
peso
elements
es
that we
claramente
can
distinto.
see. But of course,
Las
the weight
principales
they have is
categorías,
very different.
autonomía,
The
cuidados
different
domiciliarios,
categories:
cronicidad,
self-sufficiency,
discapacidad y residencia.
disability,
Empleamos
and
los términos que
elderly
se
homes.
usan en los planes, ¿de
We
acuerdo?
are
No
using
estamos
the same
usando
terms
palabras
that are
para
being
cambiar,
used in
digamos,
the
estos
plans.
conceptos,
We are
sino que
not
estos son
using
los
the
conceptos que
terms to
aparecían. Las
change the
categorías las
concepts.
creamos
The categories were
según la
created
frecuencia de
depending
aparición de
on
los
the
términos
frequency
clave.
of apparition
En este caso,
of
los
appearance
recursos
of
llamativos
the
son las palabras
key
que se empleaban
terms.
en esos
These were the
diferentes
terms that were used
y por
in
último,
the
ya para
different
acabar,
plans.
me
And
gustaría
to conclude,
salientar que
I
la
would like
pandemia,
to say that the
como
pandemic,
elemento crítico, es un poco lo que defiendo en mi tesis doctoral,
this is what I
fue
wrote
una
about on
ventana
my
de oportunidad,
PhD,
a pesar de que puede ser un
opens
poco
a
extraño, que
window
el
of
concepto es
opportunity.
básicamente
The
es un
pandemic opens a
momento
window of
puntual que nos
opportunity.
permite
It is
avanzar
a
muchísimo en determinadas
specific
áreas
moment in
de lo
time,
que sea,
but will
y en
enable
este
us
sentido,
to
y por lo que
advance in
sea,
many
viene a
different
ser
fields.
que nos obligó
And
a
in this
todos y a
case,
todas
it
como personas
forced us
usuarias a tener que
all
relacionarnos
as users
habitualmente con la
to
administración
have
pública en
some
general y
relationship
sanitaria
with
en
the
específico.
public administration in in general and specifically with the health administration. And then we can see the latest data from the Statistic Institute. You can look for them about the last wave in June, and people are not using e-health services more, but since they were so such a long waiting list, and due to mismanagement regarding online consultations, you were phoned not at the right time and so on. So what I take from this PhD and other focus groups and discussions is that we have lost the window of opportunity. We have lost the opportunity of moving forward. We could have convinced all these users to stay and to keep on using the online services. So the time that we could have given to these people is going to be an element that will block the creation of these profiles. This is a pessimistic view, and perhaps it should be confirmed with more information, but the data that are coming out are actually in this line, along this line. We are waiting for the confirmation. There is a lot that has been done in terms of e-health, but more should be done. And we cannot see a reduction of costs in this field. And with this, I will finish my presentation. If you have any questions or you want to further your information, you have my contact details here. And some of these elements, as I mentioned, have already been published, but in other cases, we have published very recent papers in the last month, actually, and they are already available. So now I will give the floor to the question session. Thank you very much. And sorry, I apologize for my delay. Okay, thank you very much. It has been very, very interesting for determining what we care about. We have talked about the relationship with the administration, the financial banking system, and now the health systems. And we can mention others that are also essential, but all of them have an impact on our well-being levels. And you said that you finished a bit on a pessimistic note, but I have to say that probably tomorrow we will have a more optimistic and constructive session. We will talk about experiences that will make us see that we do have open windows of opportunities in the diagnosis that you have just made. Is there any questions, any final questions to close the session before we go out for lunch or to have a rest? I apologize, but I am in a country where we eat at noon, so having lunch now for me it's a bit strange. Are there any questions in the room regarding e-health? Daniela, we do not have any questions here. And on the chat, Beatriz, yes, you were wanting to do some comments. Yes, very briefly. I was wanting to ask Bran if this dichotomy about public and private health system, have you seen in the private system if there are more steps moving forward towards digitalization? In this respect, private health sector is more difficult to investigate because it is not as accessible, or we have the sample is more difficult to obtain because you need a sample with a sufficient number of people, so you can do several attempts. So we were more specific due to these reasons, but seeing the services that they offer, the different services that they offer, they are focusing more on online medicine and online assistance for the services or provision of services, and they are using this as a strong point, as a strength. You won't have to wait, you won't have to go to the doctors to get an appointment. No, you just can phone or connect with your webcam at home to have this consultation. And why can they do this? Because this healthcare is designed for a very specific profile, part of the population. And of course, for them, it is more profitable not to have a big consultation room, but to have the doctors doing it at their home. And then they can reduce the space of at the reception, for instance. So they are reducing physical spaces, and of course they are saving rent or the payment of the premises. And of course, in the technical aspects too, you are reducing spaces, and you are also investing more in this model where I am doing it and the public administration is not doing it. So I am different, I am swifter, I am faster. You do not have to move away. So this is their strength, so to speak. Of course, there are different things, and the public sector is not advertising it, although they already have some aspects implemented. They have the apps that allow much more than we can imagine, but it's not being advertised. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We could carry on, but Daniel, considering where you live, okay, we are going to close the session now. And I would just like to comment that tomorrow we will carry on. We will open the session at 9:15, and then we will have a keynote speak in person about the digital skills and intergenerational spaces for the digitalization of the older people. We will see more specific questions to be able to move forward in the digitalization process with older people. We have mentioned earlier, where are the people? And Miguel Torres Canals will give this presentation. So see you tomorrow, and thank you all for attending, and all the speakers, of course. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow. Thank you all. Thank you for your participation. Thank you.